Black homeless boy shouts, "Don't eat that!" Millionaire freezes when she finds out why. Imagine this. A woman sits alone in an elegant restaurant, surrounded by soft candlelight and the gentle hum of polite conversation. It's the kind of place where everything seems perfect. Pristine white tablecloths, attentive waiters, the aroma of exquisite cuisine wafting through the air. She's a picture of success, dressed in a tailored outfit, her movements graceful as she reaches for her wine glass. Her name is Clara Whitman, a millionaire who has worked tirelessly for decades to build her empire. Tonight is her night to relax, to celebrate her hard work, and to indulge in a rare moment of stillness. The waiter approaches with her dinner, a beautifully plated lobster tail, its presentation almost too perfect to disturb. Clara smiles, her mind drifting to thoughts of how far she's come. This moment feels well-earned, almost poetic. As she picks up her fork, she hears a commotion in the distance. It's faint at first, a voice, sharp and insistent, cutting through the otherwise serene atmosphere. The voice grows louder, closer, until it becomes impossible to ignore. "Don't eat that." The words ring out, startling Clara and silencing the entire restaurant. Heads turn, utensils clatter against plates, and a hush falls over the room. Clara freezes, her fork hovering in midair. She looks up to see the source of the disruption, a young black boy, no older than 12, standing at the edge of her table. He's disheveled, barefoot, and trembling with urgency. Clara is caught between confusion and disbelief. Who is this child? How did he get in here, in a place like this? The restaurant manager rushes toward him, anger flashing across his face as he grabs the boy by the arm. "You can't be in here," the manager hisses, trying to drag him away. But the boy resists, his voice breaking with desperation. "Please, she can't eat that. It's not safe." Clara feels her heart racing. The boy's fear is palpable, raw, and utterly convincing. She glances down at her plate. Everything looks normal, more than normal really. The dish is perfect, untouched, a testament to the restaurant's high standards. And yet, something about the boy's plea makes her hesitate. "Wait," she says, her voice cutting through the tension. The manager stops, startled by her calm but commanding tone. "Let him speak." The boy looks at her, his dark eyes wide and full of emotion. For a moment, there's silence. The entire restaurant holds its breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Clara can feel the stares from the other diners, their judgmental whispers, their discomfort at the scene unfolding before them. The boy swallows hard, his voice trembling as he speaks. "I saw someone in the kitchen," he says. "He put something in your food." "Something bad." Clara's pulse quickens. She looks down at her plate again, suddenly unsure of what she's seeing. Could this boy be telling the truth? Or was he lying, desperate for attention, or perhaps trying to con her? The whispers around her grow louder, the tension in the room unbearable. Clara's mind races with questions. Who was this boy? Why was he so adamant? And most importantly, could he be right? Clara's mind spun as she stared at the boy. His words echoed in her head. "He put something in your food. Something bad." She glanced around the room. Every eye was on her, waiting to see how she would react. The waiter stood frozen, his tray trembling in his hands, unsure of what to do. The manager glared at the boy, clearly angered by the disruption. Clara could feel the weight of their judgment, the unspoken tension that filled the room. "Are you sure about this?" Clara asked the boy, her voice steady but laced with unease. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the boy said nothing. Then he nodded, firmly, resolutely. "I saw it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wouldn't lie about something like this." Clara's hands began to tremble. She didn't want to believe him. How could this happen in a place like this, a restaurant with a flawless reputation? But there was something in his eyes, a raw sincerity that she couldn't ignore. The fear in his voice wasn't the fear of being caught or causing trouble. It was the fear of watching something terrible happen. The manager, still holding the boy by the arm, broke the silence. "Mom, I assure you, this is nonsense. This boy, he's a street kid. He has no business being here." His words were harsh, dismissive, as if the boy's very presence was an insult to the restaurant. Clara turned to the manager, her voice sharper now. "That may be, but what if he's telling the truth?" She glanced down at her plate again, her appetite completely gone. "I want you to check the kitchen, now." The manager hesitated, clearly offended by her suggestion. "Ms. Whitman, I can assure you," he began, but Clara cut him off. "I said check the kitchen," she repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And bring the chef, I want to see him." The tension in the room was unbearable. Clara could feel the judgmental stares of the other diners, could hear their murmured disbelief. "Why is she humoring him?" someone whispered. "He's probably trying to scam her," another said. But Clara ignored them all, focusing instead on the boy standing in front of her. "Why would you risk this?" she asked him softly. "Why would you risk coming in here, knowing they'd try to throw you out?" The boy hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "I couldn't just stand there and let it happen." Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. There was no hesitation in his voice, no attempt to make excuses. He was just a child, someone who should have been worrying about school and friends, not about saving strangers in a world that barely noticed him. And yet, here he was, standing in a room full of people who judged him simply for existing, trying to do what was right. Moments later, the manager returned, his face pale and tight with discomfort. Behind him was the chef, a tall man with a stiff posture and a carefully blank expression. "We didn't find anything," the manager said, but there was something in his voice, a hesitation that Clara caught immediately. "Show me," she said firmly, rising from her seat. The manager led Clara into the kitchen, the boy following closely behind. The staff parted as they entered, their eyes wide with confusion and unease. Clara could feel the heat of the stoves, the sharp scent of spices and seared meat filling the air. Everything looked pristine, professional, but there was an undercurrent of tension that she couldn't ignore. One of the staff, a young man working the sauté station, glanced nervously at the boy before looking away. Clara noticed the subtle movement and turned to him. "You," she said, "do you know anything about this?" The man shook his head quickly, but his eyes betrayed him, darting toward a corner of the kitchen. Clara followed his gaze and saw it, a small container tucked behind a stack of pans. Heart pounding, she reached for the small container hidden behind the pans. Inside was a powdery substance, something that clearly didn't belong in any legitimate recipe. The manager's face went white as Clara held up the container. "What is this?" she demanded. The chef stepped forward, his expression cold and defensive. "I don't know," he said flatly. "It's not mine." But Clara saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes, the slight twitch of his jaw. "Call the police," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "Now." As the manager scrambled to comply, Clara turned to the boy. "You saved my life," she said softly, the weight of her words settling over both of them. But her mind was spinning. How had this happened? Why had the boy been watching so closely? And what would have happened if she hadn't listened to him? For the first time that evening, Clara felt something she hadn't expected, gratitude. Not just for the boy's warning, but for his courage in the face of a world that so often dismissed him. She couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was more than a twist of fate. It was a wake-up call. And as the police arrived, uncovering the truth behind the tampered meal, Clara realized that this boy, this stranger, had done more than save her life. He had opened her eyes. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights casting sharp shadows on the restaurant's pristine walls. The chatter of the diners had turned into hushed murmurs, a mixture of shock, curiosity, and unease rippling through the room. Clara stood near the entrance to the kitchen, her pulse pounding as the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. The container of suspicious powder was now in the hands of the officers, who questioned the staff with sharp, pointed inquiries. Jamal stood silently by Clara's side, his small frame dwarfed by the imposing figures of the police officers. Clara glanced at him, noticing how tightly he gripped the edge of his tattered shirt, his knuckles pale from the pressure. His bravery had brought the truth to light, but he still looked so fragile, so out of place in this opulent setting. Clara felt an overwhelming surge of protectiveness toward him. This boy had risked everything, stepping into a world that had likely ignored and dismissed him his entire life, just to save a stranger. The investigation moved quickly. One of the officers, after inspecting the container, pulled the head chef aside. "We'll need to take you down to the station," the officer said firmly. The chef's face remained a mask of defiance, but Clara noticed the beads of sweat forming on his brow. It was clear he had been caught, though the details of his motive were still murky. Revenge? Spite? Whatever it was, it had almost cost Clara her life. The officer approached Clara next, his expression a mix of professionalism and quiet respect. "The boy saved you," he said, nodding toward Jamal. If he hadn't spoken up, there's no telling what could have happened. Clara turned to Jamal, her throat tight with emotion. The gravity of his actions struck her like a wave. This wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was a moment of extraordinary courage, driven by a moral clarity that seemed far beyond his years. "Jamal," Clara said softly, kneeling to meet his eye level. "How did you know? How could you tell something was wrong?" Jamal hesitated, his eyes darting nervously between Clara and the officers. "I've seen it before," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I live near the alley behind the restaurant. Sometimes I see things. I've seen people do bad things to the food here. I didn't know why until today. When I saw that man in the kitchen tonight, I knew something wasn't right. I just couldn't let you eat it." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened here, and yet no one had noticed. No one except a boy who lived in the shadows, forced to observe life from the outside, invisible to the people walking past him every day. The realization hit Clara like a lightning bolt. Jamal's life wasn't just hard, it was unjust. He had no family to protect him, no home to keep him safe, no system looking out for him. And yet, in the face of all that, he had chosen to step forward, to do something that most adults would hesitate to do. He had put himself at risk for a stranger who, just moments earlier, had been oblivious to his very existence. As the police escorted the chef out of the building, Clara noticed the way the other diners avoided looking at Jamal. Some whispered behind their hands. Others glanced at him with thinly veiled disdain, as if his presence alone was an inconvenience. Clara felt a rush of anger. How could they not see what she saw? How could they not recognize the courage, the integrity, the humanity in this boy? "Jamal," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you didn't just save me tonight. You reminded me of something important, something I think I'd forgotten. You showed me what it means to care about someone else, even when the world hasn't cared for you. Jamal looked at her, his eyes wide with a mix of gratitude and confusion. "I just did what I thought was right," he said quietly. But Clara wasn't done. She stood, turning to address the room. The other diners, who had been pretending not to notice the unfolding drama, suddenly found themselves the focus of her piercing gaze. "This boy," she said, her voice ringing out clearly, "is a hero. He did what so many of us wouldn't have done. He stepped forward, not for recognition, not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. And yet, how many of us would have looked past him tonight? How many of us would have judged him before even hearing his voice?" The room was silent. Some diners looked away, embarrassed. Others seemed to be genuinely reflecting on her words. Clara continued, her voice softening. "We've all been so quick to judge, myself included. But tonight, this boy reminded me of something simple but powerful. We all need each other. No one should have to live in fear, invisible and ignored, especially someone as brave as him." Clara turned back to Jamal, a resolve hardening in her chest. "I'm not going to forget you," she said. "And I'm not going to let the world forget you either." For the first time, Jamal's tense expression softened. A small, shy smile crept onto his face, and Clara knew that this was just the beginning of something far bigger than either of them had imagined. She wasn't just grateful to Jamal. She was determined to change the circumstances that had forced him into the shadows in the first place. As Clara watched the boy step into the night, she felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just gratitude, it was purpose. This wasn't just a moment of survival, it was a call to action. And Clara was ready to answer it. As the night drew on and the restaurant began to empty, Clara couldn't take her eyes off Jamal. She saw beyond the dirt on his face and the tattered clothes he wore. What she saw was a young boy who had been forced to grow up too soon, carrying the weight of experiences far beyond his years. The bravery he had shown wasn't just a single act. It was a reflection of the life he had been forced to live, where vigilance and courage were his only defenses against a world that seemed determined to ignore him. Clara leaned down, her voice soft and steady. "Jamal," she began, "I need to know, how long have you been living like this?" Jamal hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his small hands gripping the edge of the chair he was sitting in. "A few months," he said quietly, "since my mom got sick. And then she passed. I didn't have anywhere else to go." Clara felt her heart break. She could see the pain etched into every word he spoke, the effort it took to even share a sliver of his story. "And no one's helped you?" she asked, struggling to keep the emotion out of her voice. Jamal shook his head. "Sometimes people give me food or money if I'm lucky, but most of the time, people just walk by. They look at me like I don't matter." Clara swallowed hard, feeling a wave of guilt crash over her. How many times had she walked past children like Jamal on the streets of New York? How many times had she assumed someone else would step in, that it wasn't her responsibility? She reached out and gently placed her hand on Jamal's shoulder. "You matter," she said firmly, "and I'm going to make sure you know that." Jamal's wide eyes met hers, and for a moment, he seemed to search her face for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, he nodded slowly, though Clara could sense the guarded hope behind his expression. He wasn't used to people following through on promises. As the two talked, Clara began to piece together more of his story. Jamal had been staying in a makeshift shelter near the alley behind the restaurant, keeping himself alive with whatever scraps he could find. His days were spent dodging trouble and trying to stay invisible. "I didn't mean to come in tonight," he admitted. "But when I saw that man in the kitchen, I couldn't let it happen." "You did the right thing," Clara said, her voice steady. "And now, I want to do the right thing for you." That night, Clara made a decision that would change not only Jamal's life, but her own. She called a friend who worked at a local shelter, arranging for Jamal to have a safe place to stay immediately. She also promised to personally ensure he had access to the resources he needed: clothes, food, and most importantly, a chance to go back to school. But Clara knew that helping Jamal wasn't enough. As she sat in the quiet restaurant, the events of the evening replaying in her mind, she realized that Jamal's story wasn't unique. For every Jamal she had met tonight, there were hundreds, maybe thousands of others, living invisible lives in the shadows of the city. The thought filled her with a deep sense of urgency. Something had to change. The next day, Clara began laying the groundwork for a new initiative. She reached out to contacts in her network, explaining what had happened and her vision for a program that would help homeless children like Jamal. Her idea was ambitious: a community-based project that would provide not just temporary relief, but long-term opportunities. She envisioned shelters paired with mentorship programs, access to education, and resources to help these children rebuild their lives. But as she worked to bring her idea to life, Clara couldn't ignore a painful truth: the role that systemic racism had played in Jamal's circumstances. She thought about what Jamal had said, about how people often looked at him like he didn't matter. She couldn't help but wonder if his race had made him even more invisible, his struggles even easier to ignore. Clara started researching the disproportionate rates of homelessness among black children and the systemic barriers they faced. She read about how racism in housing, education, and employment had created cycles of poverty that were nearly impossible to break. The more she learned, the more determined she became. This wasn't just about helping Jamal, it was about addressing the root causes of the injustice he and so many others had faced. At her first meeting with a group of community leaders, Clara stood before them, her voice steady, but filled with conviction. "This isn't just a charity project," she said. "This is about justice. It's about giving children like Jamal the chance they deserve, a chance this world has stolen from them. And we're not just going to help them survive, we're going to help them thrive." Her words ignited something in the room. People began to share their own ideas, their own stories of how they had seen these systemic failures firsthand. By the end of the meeting, Clara had assembled a team of passionate individuals ready to turn her vision into a reality. In the months that followed, the program took shape. Shelters were established, staffed by counselors and mentors who understood the unique challenges faced by homeless children, particularly those from marginalized communities. Partnerships were formed with local schools and businesses to provide educational and job opportunities. And Clara ensured that Jamal was at the heart of it all, not as a recipient of charity, but as a symbol of resilience and hope. As the program grew, Clara and Jamal often spoke at events together, sharing their story to raise awareness and inspire others. Jamal, once shy and hesitant, had begun to find his voice. "I used to think no one cared about kids like me," he said at one event, standing beside Clara. "But now I know that's not true. People care. They just need to see us, to really see us." Clara couldn't have been prouder of him. Jamal's journey wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. And in helping him, Clara had found a purpose that was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. Together, they had shown the world that even in the face of injustice, change was possible. And it all began with a single act of courage, Jamal shouting, "Don't eat that," when no one else would. As the months turned into years, Clara's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The night Jamal rushed into that restaurant had sparked something much larger than either of them could have foreseen. What began as a moment of survival grew into a movement of hope, justice, and community. Jamal thrived in his new environment, but it wasn't an easy journey. The trauma of living on the streets didn't fade overnight. He struggled to trust, to believe that this new chapter in his life was real. But with Clara by his side and the support of the community they were building, he began to heal. Clara made sure Jamal had access to therapy, education, and mentors who understood the challenges he faced. Slowly but surely, the boy who had been invisible to the world began to shine. Jamal's natural intelligence and resilience blossomed. He excelled in school, surprising even himself with his love for learning. He took a special interest in history, particularly stories of individuals who had overcome insurmountable odds. "It's like seeing a part of myself in their stories," he told Clara one day. His teachers marveled at his drive, his hunger to succeed, and his ability to inspire those around him. Meanwhile, Clara's program, now officially named Second Chances, had grown beyond anything she had envisioned. What started as a local initiative expanded into a network of shelters and mentorship programs across the city. Each center was staffed with individuals who understood the complexities of homelessness, systemic racism, and the unique struggles faced by marginalized youth. Clara worked tirelessly, pouring her time, resources, and heart into the cause. But for every success, there were reminders of how much work remained to be done. At one fundraising gala for Second Chances, Clara took the stage, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This isn't just about providing shelter," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "It's about dismantling the systems that make children like Jamal invisible. It's about giving them the opportunities they deserve. And it's about reminding ourselves that we are all connected. Our humanity depends on how we treat the most vulnerable among us." Jamal stood in the audience, now a confident teenager, smiling as Clara spoke. He had become an integral part of the program, mentoring younger children who were just beginning their journeys out of homelessness. "You have to believe in yourself," he often told them, "because if I can do it, you can too." One day, Clara and Jamal were invited to speak at a national conference on homelessness and systemic inequality. It was Jamal's first time traveling out of state, and the experience filled him with a mix of excitement and nerves. Standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people, he shared his story with a confidence that brought tears to the audience's eyes. "I used to think no one cared about kids like me," he said. "But I was wrong. People care. They just don't always see us. Clara saw me, and because of that, my life changed forever. But I'm not the only one who needs to be seen." Clara followed Jamal's speech, her voice full of pride and determination. "Jamal's story is just one of many," she said. "There are thousands of children like him, living invisible lives in the shadows of our cities. We cannot afford to look away. We have to do better, not just with our words, but with our actions." The conference marked a turning point for Second Chances. Donations poured in, and the program's reach extended to other cities. Clara and Jamal became advocates not only for homelessness, but also for addressing the deep-seated racism that perpetuated cycles of poverty and inequality. They spoke at schools, community centers, and corporate events, challenging people to examine their biases and take action. For Clara, the work was deeply personal. She often reflected on the privilege she had once taken for granted, the ease with which she could move through life without worrying about being seen or judged. "Jamal taught me to see," she said in one interview. "He taught me to pay attention to the people society overlooks. And he reminded me that change doesn't come from waiting. It comes from stepping forward." Jamal, now a young man on the cusp of adulthood, continued to grow into a leader in his own right. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer, driven by a desire to fight for justice and ensure that others didn't have to endure the hardships he had faced. Clara supported him every step of the way, cheering him on as he earned scholarships and accolades. But their bond was more than just mentor and mentee. They had become family. One day, while walking through the streets of New York together, Jamal paused and looked around. "You know," he said, "I used to hate this city. It felt like it didn't care if I existed. But now I see it differently. I see the good in it, the people who do care. And I see how much more we can do." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "That's the power of hope," she said. "It lets us see what's possible, even when things seem impossible." As the years went on, Clara and Jamal's work continued to inspire others. Second Chances became a national model for addressing homelessness, offering not just shelter, but dignity, opportunity, and love. At one of the program's anniversary events, Clara spoke to a room filled with supporters, program alumni, and community leaders. This all started with a boy who had every reason to look away, but chose to step forward, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Jamal didn't just save my life. He gave me a reason to make the world better." Jamal took the stage after her, now a confident young man with a commanding presence. "We all have the power to change someone's life," he said. "Sometimes it's as simple as paying attention, as simple as caring." That's what Clara did for me, and that's what I hope all of us will do for others. The audience erupted into applause, many wiping tears from their eyes. The event ended with a powerful sense of community, a shared understanding that change was possible, and that it started with each individual taking responsibility for the world around them. For Clara and Jamal, the journey wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation, about turning moments of courage into movements of compassion. Their story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that no one is invisible, and that together we can create a world where everyone is seen, valued, and given a second chance. Years later, as Clara and Jamal stood on a stage together, facing a room filled with people whose lives had been touched by their story, they could hardly believe how far they had come. What had started as a single act of courage, a boy's desperate warning, and a woman's decision to listen, had grown into a movement that spanned cities, inspired countless individuals, and changed the trajectory of so many lives. The event was the 10th anniversary of Second Chances, and the room was buzzing with energy. Former program participants shared their stories of triumph, from graduating college to starting businesses and families of their own. Volunteers and donors exchanged hugs and laughs, bonded by the shared mission that had brought them together. Clara looked out at the crowd, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. This wasn't just her story or Jamal's, it belonged to all of them. Clara took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent, the weight of her presence commanding attention. 10 years ago, she began, her voice steady, a young boy saved my life. But he didn't just save me from harm, he saved me from a life of complacency. He reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that every single one of us has the power to make a difference. She paused, her eyes scanning the audience. Jamal taught me to see the world differently. He showed me the strength, courage, and resilience that so many people carry, even when the world seems determined to ignore them. And because of his bravery, we've built something together, something that proves that no one is invisible, that everyone deserves a second chance. Clara's voice trembled slightly as she continued. But let me be clear, this isn't just about me or Jamal. This is about all of us. Every person in this room, every person watching this video, You all have the power to create change. Maybe it's by mentoring a child, volunteering at a shelter, or simply treating someone with kindness and dignity. It doesn't matter how small the act may seem. It all matters. Jamal stepped forward, now a confident young man in his early 20s, his voice carrying the same quiet determination that had saved Clara's life all those years ago. "I used to think my life didn't matter," he said, his gaze steady. "I thought no one cared, but Clara proved me wrong. And this community, this movement, it proved me wrong again. Now I know that every person matters and every story matters, including yours." He gestured toward the audience and the viewers watching online. "So I want to ask you something. Who can you look out for? Who in your life might be invisible right now, just waiting for someone to see them? Maybe it's the kid sitting alone in school, or the neighbor you've never spoken to, or someone you pass on the street every day. What can you do to make them feel seen, heard, and valued?" The room was silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone like a warm embrace. Clara smiled, stepping back up to the microphone. "Jamal is right," she said. "Change doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in moments. Moments when we choose to care, to act, to love. And together, we can create a world where no one is invisible." She looked directly into the camera, addressing the viewers at home. If this story has touched you, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time when someone made you feel seen, or when you helped someone else. Let's create a space where we can learn from each other, inspire each other, and build a community of compassion. Clara paused, her voice softening. And if you believe in this message, if you want to be part of this movement, please subscribe to this channel. Join us as we continue to share stories of hope, resilience, and the power of kindness. Together, we can shine a light in the darkest corners, one act of love at a time. The audience erupted into applause, the energy in the room electric. Jamal and Clara embraced, their journey coming full circle. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one fueled by the collective hope and determination of a community united in purpose. As the screen faded to black, these words appeared: "Look out for each other, see the invisible, be the difference." The viewers were left with a sense of purpose, a reminder that even the smallest actions could ripple outward, creating waves of change. And as they clicked to subscribe, comment, and share, they became part of something bigger, a movement driven by love, compassion, and the belief that no one should ever be left behind.